Yes, we are live.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. Okay. So now let's take a minute and share the page, and then we will get back to the conversation. Just
Sounds
in a
good.
sec. Yeah, in a second. Okay. Hello, viewers. Welcome to Social Justice Action Research platform. So, in this platform, we talk about different issues that impact the social justice issues locally and globally. Today, we are privileged to have Rafayed as one of our guests. Rafayed is one of the very prominent and young water security practitioner in Bangladesh, and he has had a lot of impressive achievement by now. Rafayed, congratulations! You just have won Diana Award, so that's amazing. That's tremendously very meaningful. We are waiting for one of our other guests, so we will go on with the conversation. So when Sylvie does, join us, we will take the conversation from there. So without further ado, if you could please tell us, your journey and how did you come to, the water security issue, and how did you get involved in climate justice, and about your organization Footstep.
All right. First of all, thank you, Bhaya, for having me on the show. I'm actually very excited because we're going to be talking about two topics which are very close to my heart. So interestingly, I started Footsteps back in 2013 with a bunch of high school friends. But at that point, we didn't have any idea that we were going to work on water security issues, to be honest. It was 2 years later in 2015, after a personal experience with a rickshaw puller, that we actually got the idea and got invested into it. So the story is basically I was traveling on a rickshaw from Gulshan to Tejgaon. And in the middle of the way, the rickshaw puller asked permission if he could drink water. But he didn't have any water bottle on him. So what he did, he got off the rickshaw, he crossed the road, and across the road there was a small water filter outside an apartment building where he got to drink the water from. And seeing that, I had the idea that I was working on corporate social responsibility at that time. So looking at that, I thought that why don't I try to do something similar to this by getting companies involved and setting up water systems outside their office spaces so that people can enjoy safe water access in public spaces. And that's how the idea of Project Trishna was born. And interestingly, when we first implemented it, we initially thought that by just setting up a water system, we would be able to solve the problem of safe water access. But once we actually implemented it, we realized that this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many more aspects that we have to address before we can actually ensure safe water access. And looking at the challenges that we faced through this project, it got us more invested into working towards safe water access. And we've been working for the last 5 years on Project Trishna. And in the last 5 years, we faced a number of failures, but these failures have been our teachers. And from these failures, we've been able to learn on how to adapt to community needs and take a more community-driven approach to make our projects more successful and sustainable. So that is how we actually started with Project Trishna and started working on water security issues. To be honest, if you asked me 10 years ago if I was going to be working on water security issues, I would have said no, because I had no idea about water security and I didn't have any interest. The passion developed from the experience that I had that day in 2015 with that rickshaw puller.
Mm-hmm. And when you say that community-driven approach, can you unpack that a little bit?
So community-driven approach is basically what I mean is when we think about implementing a water system or a water filter or a tube well, we feel we have to implement the solution in places where we know that the problems exist without even contacting with or communicating with the communities properly. And that is the biggest mistake anybody can make, because before you implement a solution, you first need to interact with the community, build their trust. Trust building is probably the most important aspect when you're working on a project. Because once you have the community's trust, then you can work alongside to make the project more sustainable. Imagine a scenario where you've heard about a community which is facing water issues. So what you go there for a day, you set up a water system, come back. What happens is you haven't interacted with the community before. So what happens is the community is in shock. You gave them the water system, and they don't even know how to properly maintain it. So 3 months later, the project fails, and it's back to square one. So that is what I mean by community-driven approach. You interact with the community, build trust, and then give your solution so that you guys can actually work together and design it according to the community specification. One thing I want to address is when it comes to addressing water accessibility, safe water accessibility, or any other issues, it cannot be a universal approach. Each community has its own specific set of problems. Each community is unique in its own way. So you have to design the solution in that particular approach. And then only then it can be successful and sustainable at the same time.
Mm-hmm. I think, yes. Hello, Sylvie. Thank you very much. We are so excited I was thinking, we don't want to start the conversation without Sylvie. Can you hear us all right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, perfect. All right. So we just have covered the story behind Rafayat's story of getting involved in water security issues. And one of the very important thing, he just discovered is that how do you actually try to solve a problem? Trying to solve a problem without actually first talking to the community, getting to know what is actually the nuances of the problem without building the trust, you can't actually solve the problem, into nuances. But, Rafayat, it's a bit counterintuitive because you have mentioned something very important that, if you place a water system in a community and the community does not know how to actually run or maintain the water system, it's going to fail. Other than that aspect, what are the other aspects of trust building that people who work with social issues like this have to consider? Like plainly speaking, water security. You are giving me water that is extremely important for me. Why would I have to worry about building trust?
Mm-hmm. So building trust is important in a sense that by building trust, you get to work on other expansion-based projects as well with different communities. Like if the community doesn't know you properly, if you don't have that trust, then they won't give that much importance to your solution, to be honest. They're going to be like, oh, okay, he came, he gave the system, and then he went away. That's about it. They're going to take it for granted. So the main reason for building that trust is so that you are able to sustain the project in the long run, so that the community is cooperative with you, with your solution ideas that you have. That is the most important aspect over here, because you can give a solution, you can give the biggest type or the most innovative solutions to these communities, but if they are not cooperative to you and how to maintain it in the long run, then what is the value, right?
Sylvie, yeah. So sorry, I'm having a little bit of connection problem. Give me one quick second. Apologies, we had just a slight problem. I think we lost Sylvie once again. I think she'll be able to join us again. Now, okay, I think she's back. Sylvie, can you hear us all right?
Yes, I can hear
okay.
you. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yeah, yes, we can hear you.
All right.
So let's start with you now. Tell us the story that how did you take such active interest in climate justice issues or environmental issues? Where did your journey start from?
Okay, first of all, I really apologize for some technical issues from my end, but I'm loud and clear. I hope you can hear me. My journey actually began as a potential engineering student, who decided to jump from engineering to environmental science. Although I enrolled into the engineering program, there are some general education courses which are taught at university levels, where students from other disciplines come and join to know about different disciplines like public health, linguistics, law, and one such was environmental science for me during my first year. And upon doing that course, I realized the importance of taking rapid actions. And this is one area where you can work, and you can work from starting from the grassroots levels, from the national policy levels, and straight into the international levels. So when I got that idea, I think my narrative was moving towards something where I could contribute at a implementation level, also for advocacy. And as I started working, initially it was a broad environmental sector, but as working in the climate change portfolio and different projects, I realized the importance of making changes with little effort, but a lot of changes that can be done, especially behavioral changes among the N-mile populations, which tend to stay beyond the project's stipulated lifetime. And when you build that kind of capacity within people, you don't have to engage all the institutions necessarily, but you can strengthen communities from their points. So I think upon receiving such information and upon having these experiences, I grew lots of interest and I want to hone on to this. Could you please unmute yourself?
Thank you very much, Sylvie. My bad. Yeah. So also to introduce you to the audience, one of the things, sorry, we haven't mentioned at the beginning that Sylvie works at the UNDP, and she also teaches environmental science at the North South University. And Rafael, he studied environmental economics, and also he's running one of the biggest projects in Bangladesh, Footsteps. So both of you are very intimately connected to the climate justice issues, and you're in it. Now, this question is actually for both of you. We can actually bounce off the ideas with each other. So the fact is that when we talk about water security, we know that water security is a global issue. So how big is the water security issue for Bangladesh, A, and B is that what is the impact, the scale of the socioeconomic impact of a water security issue? I know personally that Sylvie has done a lot of research on that. She has also written her graduate research dissertation on that, thesis on that. So I was wondering, Sylvie, can we start with you and then we'll go to Rafael?
Sure. I mean, first, it is needless to say that Bangladesh is an extremely climate vulnerable nation, and every year due to natural disasters, we're having GDP loss of about 2.5%. It's a lot, and we're also losing an average 13,000 people due to natural disasters and death incurred from it. So, as water security and climate change are extremely intertwined, the sectors that are cardinally affected due to climate change, of which water sectors are of primary importance. For example, talk about meeting the SDG 6, you have to think about these sectors like agriculture, fisheries, many other different intertwined sectors that contribute directly to our economy. And well, starting with agriculture, definitely. I mean, the amount of cultivable lands that we have is shrinking over the years. You almost know this, that we are losing, in Shatkhira alone, in 7% decline has been there between 1996 to 2008. And this is because of, salinity intrusion due to different types of problems, of which climate change is a big reason. And moving on, this impacts directly on the amount of drinking water for the poor, especially those who do not have safe and saline-free drinking water, both from the private and the public provision. And as a result, only these people are reliant on sources like ponds and tube wells. And as you know that in the rural sector, almost 73% of the rural economy, the rural people are dependent on tube wells as their only source of drinking water. But when this drinking water are also, these ponds and tube wells are also affected infrastructure when certain calamities like natural disasters like cyclones and these things happen. So it's serious, it's a grave issue, and it needs to be tackled with a lot of incorporation from the private sector, from the government, from the NGOs in a very comprehensive manner.
And Rafael?
So from my end, I believe that the problem is severe. It's because our situation is different from other nations, especially in Africa, who are facing water scarcity issues. For example, in African nations of Ethiopia, you will find like there are lack of reservoirs, water reservoirs or aquifer sources. But in Bangladesh, that is actually not the case. You know, like we receive over like 2,000 millimeters of rainfall a year. There's so much water that it ends up killing us as well through floods and destroying our livelihoods. But the problem is like what we face is we do not know how to properly harness that water that comes in. All of these water sources that are coming in are completely raw. And I feel like our approach has been a bit wrong from the very beginning. I'll share an example with you. During the 1980s, there was a massive, like, country level expansion in, like, setting up tube wells as well. And during that same time, there was a rise in cases of arsenic contamination. So why is that? It's because the approach was half-hearted at most. Because what you're doing by setting up a tube well is you're setting up a water extractor. Think of it as a computer. You buy a computer, you're using the internet. You have access to internet, but the internet has a lot of viruses. So what you do, you have to like install an antivirus to protect your computer from these viruses, which is available on the internet. It's the same thing with water extractors. If you don't have a proper filtration mechanism, then it's not going to work. You're actually putting the people at risk as well. You are extracting raw water, and it's completely dependent on luck at this point, because today there might not be contaminants in the water, but due to like pollution levels, it may increase in the future. Maybe not today, but 5 years down the line, maybe that might be the case. So our situation is different in that way, is that we cannot harness the water properly. I'll share another example with you. The country of Israel. Israel receives less than 200 millimeters of rainfall each year, yet they do not have the problem of water scarcity. Why is that? It's because they're able to harness the water properly, as well as have obtained that sustainability scale for their water management. They recycle their water. The small amount of water that they have, they recycle it, and they do not waste water as well. In a country like Bangladesh, there's so much wastage of water that like if we were actually able to harness all the water that we had, maybe we could be like the world's leaders in like exporting clean drinking water as well. Who knows? We have that much water. But that is the sense. Our approach has been a bit wrong from the beginning, and it needs to change. Like right now, we're dependent on traditional practices when it comes to safe drinking water access. Like you mentioned the case of Shatkhira. Most of the places in Shatkhira, like Kaliganj, Gangni, what they have is PSFs, pond sand filtration mechanisms, which is not actually a very proper filtration mechanism process. So you need to bring an innovation in this sector as well. And the only way you can bring an innovation is if you create the value for safe water access. And that is by changing the behavior within the communities so that they do not take water for granted and they actually put that value on that water. So that from my end is why like water security is a big issue in this country right now. It's completely dependent on the mentality at this point.
To add to your point, Rafat, and also to your point, Sylvie, one of the things that we know when we talk about, so let's talk about tube oil. So I am from the northern part of Bangladesh, and the district where I'm from, that's where actually the first arsenic contamination was widely found. A lot of people have paid very heavy price. So in one article I read is that you both of you know that a lot of the tube wells and the water extraction sources were funded by World Bank or international sources. And that's where actually Rafayat made an excellent point, is that they were trying to solve the problem without actually understanding that what is the nuance of the problem that actually they're trying to tackle. And this is nothing new. I hope it doesn't sound too far-fetched but if you look at historically, that one of the ways that when we have tried to solve problems, when the problem came from outside, the solution has been given to us from external expertise or the external sources who knew it, how to solve a problem better, we paid heavy price. So that's one of that. The other thing that you have mentioned, and I would like both of your responses to that. Yes, in terms of changing our mindset is extremely important. But what is the percentage of safe drinking water, or water that is we can use, are used by individual people in their household? I can perhaps turn off my water tap, or can save a bit of water when I'm taking shower. But if we look at the industrial usage of water, that's where according to research shows the majority of the water consumption. More than 80% of global safe water is used by the agro farming. So in that case, what should be our attitude? I can change my behavior, but can I go over to a company and say, hey, you have to change your water behavior, your water consumption behavior?
So for if I may, so in this terms,
Yes, sure.
the behavioral change comes in two different aspects. One is towards conservation, and the other is towards using alternative sources. Remember, I already mentioned that we have an abundance of raw water. Maybe for drinking water sources, we may depend on like groundwater sources, but for agricultural purposes, we can actually try to harness the surface water, the rainwater that comes off, and that is and can actually try, and we can actually work towards converting river water or like flood water for agricultural purposes. So we need to find alternative sources for water accessibility, so that we can actually reduce the pressure on our groundwater sources, which can be reserved completely for drinking water in that way. That can be a behavioral change aspect as well.
Just to add on to what Ravat said, I completely agree. And the fact that when you mentioned about the pond sand filter, you must understand that every problem in every locality, the southern belt might look like one complete belt, but these problems are extremely context specific. Because the salinity amount, the parts per million, the amount of concentration of salinity in one area might not be the same as other, although they lie in the broader belt in the southern region. So where, for example, a pond sand filter might be working, it might not be working for another region. So you really need to go and have, that's why I press on the importance of community participation so much, because it's the local people who understand their context most. And seldom happens that their inclusion, their remarks are not taken into consideration, very little. But now the practice is different. The practice is becoming different, because when projects are being developed, interventions are being developed, they're being included slowly within the system, and a lot of credit goes to the government because they're lording at the local levels too. But yeah, I completely agree.
Just to like bounce off that point, regarding like the community-driven approach, that is something that we've been doing for the last 5 years as well. Like we are currently working in this area called Kaliganj in Shatkhira, where we've seen like a lot of people who are like traveling for hours to collect water as well. So the pond sand filtration, it kind of has some limitations. For example, like socioeconomic limitations in that way, that people have to travel for like 2-3 hours, or wait in line for like over like 2 hours to collect just one jar of water. So that sets up some level of limitations as well. One suggestion: why don't we try to create a centralized water treatment plant, and then create a logistical platform the way like Food Panda or Uber does, and try to deliver the water to the doorsteps? That can be a solution which saves time, where people can actually utilize that time for other socioeconomic efforts as well. These are some of the things that I'm trying to like suggest, because alternative ways of how we harness water, or how we see water as a resource, is very crucial at this time, because there's too much water, and we can actually like utilize that in certain ways and harness it, and actually benefit not only the people in this country, but other places as well.
Question to you, Rafat, that you started the idea sparked, in one of your personal experiences with the rickshawala. But right now, starting from that journey, right now, what are the places where Footstep is operating? And what's your coverage, areas you're working, A, and B, in working in different areas, what you folks have actually learned, in terms of community-driven approaches, these things work and these things don't work.
So currently, Footsteps is working in 15 districts across Bangladesh. Some of them are like Dhaka, Chittagong, Tangail, Shatkhira, Khulna, as well as Kushtia. So our focus is like when we go into certain communities, like I mentioned before, we try to build the trust within the people as well. So we have specific personnel within these communities who act as like our ambassadors, or like act as our people, to like convince the others towards coming towards our solutions as well. But when we design the solutions, we take in the community input. What is their experience regarding water shortage? How do they see the solution from their perspective? And taking those two things into perspective, then we design the solution. What we do is put in a little knowledge on how to manage the system into their own perspective, and that is when the magic happens. And that is when they learn how to sustain the systems on their own. So it's basically their solutions, but we're just acting as a catalyst to make it more sustainable.
And have you folks have been receiving any government support, in your work, and how is it working? Is it entirely your initiative, or you have been also been supported by the government?
So it's mainly supported. Most of them are mainly supported by private organizations, both nationally and internationally. Mainly because we focus in like very grassroots levels. So it's like, since it's very community approach, it's not like very large scale. So suppose like one small village with 300 people. So that's how deep like our approach is in that way. So right now we are currently working with corporations like DNCC, as well as like we're in talks with LGRD as well regarding this. But soon, hopefully, we're gonna be working with them for like mass level project Krishna expansion, where we can like implement community approach solutions in all these parts where people are like facing water distress.
Now, the next question is to you, Sylvie. Now, we know that water security is a gendered issue. It impacts women more than men. And I want to hear from your experience, your research, that how is it gendered, and after you respond, Rafai, if you could kindly add to that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely this is a gendered problem, and women are at a certain disadvantage when it comes to say the impacts of climate change or water insecurity and how to manage the available water that there is. It's just almost like the situation as Rafat said, that it's just water everywhere, but not a drop of water to drink. And when you have that drop of water, you just have to make sure that you economize that one drop of water on one jar of water so much that it lasts you for like a day, but very, very carefully. So to begin with, I think this is a socioeconomic problem in the South Asian context, that women are under, we face a set of economic and cultural barriers, and that includes many like early marriages, issues like dowry during the marriage, or when the cross district migration that women have to, for survival, come towards the cities when they have to work in unsafe or protected environments. So there is, of course, the backdrop situation is a lot to do with the safety and security, sexual harassment, and all that. Now, coming to the water security issue, I think I'll start with the opportunities that there is for women to actually get engaged with the water-related livelihood activities. Because women are really expected to take care of their families as a sole responsibility, to probably take care of their children, the cattle, the ill mother-in-law, and the on-farm opportunities for them to work on is extremely limited, and especially because the agricultural production process has become so complicated as of late because of the agricultural lands and all these being affected by these natural disasters like cyclones. It just makes it difficult for the women to get engaged. So they are, automatically drifted towards taking the responsibilities of the domestic livelihood options. Now, coming to the drinking water, I would definitely, as Rufat said again, that as I have had the opportunity to work on my dissertation back in the University of Durham, although my data backs in 2016, that it takes on average 2.5 hours per day for women to go fetch the water and bring back home. And I really want to mention about the young children who are accompanying their mothers while going to fetch that water, and talk about when the journey from home to there and then back home is not very pleasant, because when you're standing in such a long queue, you have all these women standing with different sizes of the jars. There's social tension, cohesion between all these problems, all this during the collection of the water, and also during the journey of the water, the collection. I think these women are faced with different problems, and sexual harassment is definitely one of them. while the journey starts from the home and it might get evening by the time they're returning. So it's really an issue that poses a lot of mental and physical burden on the women. And lastly, I definitely have to mention about the health aspects, because as you know, you must have known that the amount of salinity in water is extremely high in the south and southwestern region. So their intake of sodium ions is much more than that's necessary. So I must mention that, of course, if there is there are cases of pregnant women who are ingesting this water with experiencing levels of hypertension and gestational problems. And as you know, and of course, under the COVID situation, we all know that our access to health is so critical. It's definitely out of pocket expenditure for all of us when it comes to healthcare. Now, we are talking about these people who are suffering and with such purchase power parity so marginal. They're suffering to get their next day's meal. And when there's such situation, the economic barriers are already in a very big nexus of, you know, the financial crisis, loans, how to repay loans. They do this, you know, taking money from one counterpart to pay the other when they're trapped in this vicious cycle of loan repayment. How can they afford this? How can they afford so much loss? And these are all under a very big whole nexus of very critical problems that intertwined one after the other. And women definitely bear the biggest brunt of such problems.
It's I mean I so you see in our daily day-to-day conversation, it is so hard to connect water security with someone's socioeconomic violence to the extent of, you know, sexual harassment. I read a report in 2019 that was published that showed that because of, you know, the rising water level, because of, you know, different kinds of, you know, climate change, the internal migration that is happening in Bangladesh, that, you know, which is heartbreaking, seeing that how the internally displaced people in Bangladesh, particularly again that is gendered, that, you know, the female children are, you know, impacted in ways which is not the case for the male children. So it is not in our everyday imagination to understand, oh, I mean, this water security can be as severe as this, you know, someone's health, someone's, you know, security, someone's, you know, socioeconomic situation. Rafait, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. So yeah, the point that Apu mentioned is as one of the points that I wanted to mention, but I also want to share like a case with you guys. Not specifically water security, but on the climate change agenda, where like the burden usually falls upon women. And it's an interesting game I came across a couple of days ago, and it's very unique as well. So it's a case in Gabura in the southern part of Sundarbans, and this is right after Cyclone Aila. So what happened was, because of the increase in salinity, a lot of like tiger experts believe that the habitat loss as well as increase in salinity has caused tigers to become more aggressive. And because of the loss of habitat as well and the loss of prey, they've shifted towards like attacking more humans in that case. So how is this related? So this is the case like whenever fishermen or honey collectors, whenever they go out into the forest to collect their resources, their wives or the women, they have to offer prayers or rituals to Bon Bibi so that their husbands can come back safe in that sense. But here's what's the most interesting fact. The women have to be nervous all time throughout, because if the husband doesn't come back due to a tiger attack, what happens is like they do not only have to face a loss of the grief of loss, but they're also banished from the village itself because they're believed to be bad omen, because their husband died from a tiger attack, and it was because that she was a bad luck. So this is an issue, you know, like how unique it is that the fault falls upon women when it comes to climate change, when it comes to water security issues, tiger attacks, whatever it is. So women are the most impacted when it comes to like climate change, women and children themselves. And all of these impacts are very unique that some of them do not even come up in that sense. So we have to address these factors as well. We have to look into like who are the most discriminated when it comes to climate change, water security issues, and try to empower them in many ways as we can. In terms of water security, there's something that we're doing. In flood-prone regions, we're trying to develop a portable water filtration system where women can carry it on their backs wherever they want. It's like one kilogram by weight. And what they can do is like they can convert floodwater into drinking water using that specific filter and sell it in their rural markets during a flood. What that does is creates an income source as well. And by creating an income source, it adds value to their households. And by becoming a breadwinner in that family, she has less risk of facing discrimination or domestic violence in that case, because she's the one who's bringing in the money. So we have to like, create these sort of opportunities so that the ones who were previously discriminated are now completely empowered.
Yeah. I mean, I will complicate this matter a little bit further. So what Rafat just mentioned, it's the tiger widow phenomena. So as Rafat mentioned, that when if their husbands actually get killed by tigers, they're considered to be cursed instead, ostracized. I read some literature on that, and in fact. I'm sorry, did you guys hear me, or?
I think you broke up a bit.
For like a few seconds.
Okay.
We can hear
So
you.
yeah, so when I'm very critical of Eurocentric analysis of our problem. So from that particular point of view, I came across the issue of the tiger widows and how actually it is understood. So this is what happens when the West tries to understand an species that is on the verge of extinction, tiger, and the oppression of women. So what gets understood on a surface level that, okay, it's the brown men who are torturing the brown women, and therefore we need a messiah, a savior, therefore, to rescue the brown woman from the brown men. And also, on the other hand, it is the Western white savior who is coming forward to a country like Bangladesh, to rescue a species that is on the verge of extinction, like tiger. So what is interesting is that it actually ignores 2 points. One, the historical point. The other one is actually what is ongoing. Historically speaking, in the British colonial history, the British men would actually prove their masculinity by hunting tiger. So their ability to actually claim their strength and whatnot was connected to hunting tiger, and which in many ways has actually later. I'm sure, I don't know if you have seen it or not. In many comparatively well-off households, you will see, oh, there's a tiger's head or tiger's skin. Oh, my great-great-grandfather actually hunted a tiger. But it actually came from the British colonial legacy of proving the Eurocentric masculinity. That's one. The other thing is that what is happening in Sundarbans, in that area, the rising level of water. You see, Bangladesh is not a major polluter, not a major emitter. If you look at our carbon footprint, the last time I checked, it's about 0.36%. The number one, right now emitter is China, and then you have, America. But you see, when they blame us for actually driving a species on the verge of extinction, they don't actually look into their own complicity of our current suffering. So it's sort of like analyzing. Then you have the organizations like World Wildlife, WWF. I forgot the full name of it. The Wildlife Protection Group, right? So they're coming to Sundarbans, trying to protect tigers. And this is something very fascinating, that they are teaching these men and women who have lived with tigers for centuries that how to protect yourself from tigers. So on a surface level, absolutely what is happening with the women in Bangladesh is not acceptable, and this is very unfortunate, and we need to actually speak about it. But I think we also need to complicate the analysis. We also need to hold the parties who are actually responsible, the historical. You see, nothing is ahistorical. Things happen, it has a historical background. So Rafat, when you mentioned that, I'm sorry, I couldn't help but, dropping in this analysis, which is very important. And also something that, I particularly feel very passionate about, when I talk to my colleagues or friends in the Western academia, is that when you try to understand the problems of Bangladesh, to what extent do you understand the nuances of it before actually offering a solution?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So if you had something to add to it.
Yeah, well, I'll begin with the fact that, of course, Bangladesh emits marginal. I mean, it's not even a percent, probably. It's just a nano emitter of the greenhouse gases, despite of the fact that we do have very little resources to fight the impacts of climate change, for instance. And as you know, that there is a provision for the binding regime under the United Nations Convention of Climate Change, Convention Framework on Climate Change, that the developed nations are to provide certain portion of their GNI to the countries who are actually suffering for the impacts that are caused due to the emissions that they're producing. Now, this can come in two folds. For example, under the framework, of course, they are legally binded to provide climate finance in the form of technological transfer and many other support. But we have never stopped. We have built our own resources. We have built our own expertise to tackle the situation with whatever resource we have. And one such example is the Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, with which that we are implementing a number of projects in these hard to reach areas, and we are tackling the situation with our own resources under the leadership of our prime minister. So while I agree, of course, I mean, we do encourage north to south transfer of knowledge, technology, but we do have our own practices, good practices, within which the south-south collaboration can occur, which are translatable, scalable, and replicable. And sometimes it is so seen that, let me talk about the climate finance, since I have had the chance to work on an issue which is to differentiate climate finance from the overseas development assistance. So as per the definition, of course, of the ODA, it should be 0.7% of the GNI of developed countries, which should come as aid. But if that's sometimes, as far as I last recall, it's a lot of dilution between ODA and climate finance is happening. So what is supposed to be ODA is completely different from climate finance. And that kind of situation is a blurry situation. And of course, because climate finance on its own doesn't have any universally agreed definition as of yet.
Sorry,
So these are
Sylvie,
some technical, sure.
apologize. Sorry, Sylvie. 2 points I didn't, if you want to clarify for our audience and also for us. What do you exactly mean by OD? And one other point that you mentioned is that the transfer of knowledge from north to south, and we have to talk about the transfer of knowledge from south to north.
No.
If you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
Sure, absolutely. So, development and adaptation are two different things. Mm-hmm. We first need to understand that adaptation is to tackle the problems that has already occurred, and development is to take away from, in terms of economic growth. These are two different things. While climate finance addresses adaptation to a certain problem, for example, climate change, development is a completely different story. So development is ODA. Climate change adaptation is climate finance. So these are two differences in conceptual level. And coming to the second point where I mentioned about the north to south transfer. Of course, there are lots of technological advances, and these are things that we can of course learn from. But then again, I mentioned about something called the context-specific problems, and how these local people, their indigenous knowledge and their inherent understanding. Like Rafat said, of course, we are using their local knowledge and we are just acting like catalysts. So these are something that the Western world can also learn from us. And there should be a mechanism how we can set our examples more globally. We need such platforms. We need to take these girls from the hard to reach areas to share their stories at global platforms. Now, how to build their capacity is something we have to work on. How to take them to these global platforms, us being their representatives, is something that I really strongly advocate for.
Rafat, we'll go to a very contentious area now, something, that can be, and in particular, I think both you and Sylvie, you have a unique, I would say, academic and cultural capital. I would say you both have had the privilege to study in Western academia. You both had the privilege to actually engage in intellectual, discussions, debates, dialogues with the academics from the West. Mind you that you are less than 1% of the entire student population of Bangladesh who have this unique opportunity of representing the interest of Bangladesh on a global platform. With that backdrop in mind, I'll start with Rafael. Rafael, what is climate justice to you? How do you climate justice to a layman, somebody who is not in the academic circle? Let's say I'm having a cup of tea with you and I have no idea about climate justice. Please define to me what is climate justice to you.
So climate justice is how different people are impacted, how different socioeconomic backgrounds are impacted through like one specific impact in that way. Like I'll share an example. Suppose like if there is a flood in the west coast of in near Florida, all right? If there's a flood over there, the biggest impact would be faced by neighborhoods that are predominantly Black. Why? Because they've been positioned in such a way that they are the most vulnerable in when it comes to flooding from the western side. It can be said that in a similar fashion for like the entire context of the globe. The biggest impact of climate change the biggest burden of climate change actually falls upon the least developed nations. It's because how we've been structured throughout the years, as you've mentioned, historically, how we've structured. For example, like in country, we have a higher population than Russia alone, right? Yet we have such a small area space that the impact of climate change is much more severe on us than on Russia. And that is the sense on how like our community has been developed, on how like history has acted in a way to create us within such a system that the justice falls upon all us a bit differently than others. Like the justice that America would face is completely different than Bangladesh would face. And I would suggest not even in climate change. I would like to suggest some other issues as well, like some other relatable issues. For example, we've all been witnessing the Black Lives Matter movement in America right now. See, that movement has been possible because media was able to highlight it in the West. But there are so many similar incidents happening in countries like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. But where is the media over there? So climate justice can be relatable in that way as well. Where's the focus of resources? Where's the focus of media? Where's the focus of action in that way? So that to me is how I would define climate justice, how it falls upon different people.
So what I can take from you is that, correct me if I'm wrong, is that Bangladesh is one of the least responsible countries, but one of the most vulnerable countries. We are suffering the consequences of something that we haven't done. So therefore, we are victims of systemic global economic political structure. And
it's how we've been structured, basically.
Yeah.
Throughout the years, throughout the decades.
Yeah. And Rafael, I love your point, what you just have mentioned about Black Lives Matter and our concern. And that's where I think, people like you and Sylvie can play an extremely meaningful role. By the way, when you and Sylvie, I'm not, putting, your position on pedestal. What I'm trying to say is there are ways, the voices of people who don't have the privilege, in order to protest, in order to raise a concern, not everybody is privileged to do that. Like, for instance, we have started in the United States, a lot of people who are undocumented, immigrant there that are called as illegal, undocumented alien, they don't have the, privilege to be able to, fight for their rights in so many cases. They have to run away from the, law enforcing agency like ICE and all of that. So on that note, Sylvie, and you are also an educator, you teach students. So let's say if you would meet somebody who has no background in environmental science or something, how would you explain to that person that, okay, this is, climate justice, and this is why it matters to us Bangladeshis tremendously?
Well, this is sounds very easy question. It's actually a very difficult question to answer because, you always put people at spots, but it's okay. But it's simply to actually tell somebody what is right and wrong, what you deserve, what consequences you're facing is because of something that you have committed, and is it just that you are facing the consequences or not? So it's just as simple as that. So I'll just go back in discussing about getting actually fine. We do deserve a lot of support in terms of as a compensation for damage that has been done. Yes, but where is that money? Where is the money that has been promised by the developed nations? Why isn't it coming on a timely manner? So, is Bangladesh, considering its vulnerability, its GDP, its population size, its vulnerability, is it getting its fair share of climate finance or any sort of aid that it deserves? Who tracks it? Who monitors it? Is there something questions that we need to ask? And we need to ask with our voice raised as high as possible, because of course that is just the calling out for justice. So, even in our neighboring countries, if you consider Nepal or, the other LDCs or SIDS, where does Bangladesh stand in terms of vulnerability? And when these, for example, I can talk about climate finance, because when this money are being disbursed by the donor agencies, few metrics and indicators are checked, whether how vulnerable a country is, what is their donor interest, whether they want to fund that kind of money under certain focus areas, and what is the governance level at each of the countries. So they see all these things, but it's also seen that Bangladesh is probably not receiving its fair share, despite being one of the most vulnerable countries. So just summing all this information, I think it's just just assessing the level of vulnerability you are at the global scale, how much you have emitted, and how much is being compensated for.
Absolutely. I mean,
So wait, I just want to add something. I just came up with an example from the top of my mind on how to explain climate justice to a person who has
I'm
no
loving
idea
all
about
your
this.
examples.
So this is an interesting example, completely unrelated. Suppose I am driving a
Yeah.
Toyota and I park my car, all right? And then another guy driving a Mercedes comes and bashes into my car. And now I am the one who's paying for both our damages, for both the damages done to our car. And remember, I'm driving a Toyota and he's driving a Mercedes. So I'm already broke, but he's rich. So what's happening is
Yeah.
the rich is getting richer and the poor is getting poorer. And that is basically climate justice right there.
One of the things that I'm involved with and I'm passionate about, and that's actually going to be my follow-up questions to both of you as well, is so our language is not English. I mean, we learned English going to school, so our mother tongue is Bangla. So imagine that you have gone to school and you can barely read English. Your linguistic proficiency is not up to the par, and all of a sudden, I hand to you Shakespeare, I hand to you Milton or John Donne. I say, okay, here we go. You read it. Now, if you have never been exposed to English literature, and all of a sudden I ask you to read about Shakespeare and John Donne, that's not fair at all. So one of the things that I'm passionate about and one of the things that I'm trying to do is that how do you create climate literacy, climate justice literacy for everybody? I will give you an example from the village, and I work with the rural communities, and I listen to them and I try to learn from them, from their conversation. You see, when I talk to my parents don't understand the complexity of climate justice. They don't understand, what is greenhouse gas. They don't. If I tell my parents that, according to IPCC, we just have got about, now it's 2020, so about 10 years. If we don't cut down the carbon emission, that's it. The world will lose its capacity to heal itself. That's it. These are very technical speak. These are language that you and I have the privilege to use, and you and I have had the privilege to go to the university, walk in university corridors, and had this understanding, right? So let's say I go to Rafayat's house, and there's a beautiful flower vase in Rafayat's house. Now, what I do, I break it, and I break it intentionally. So I have done a damage in Rafayat's house. So we need something where Rafayat can actually ask me, "Je bhai, you have broken my flower vase, I need the compensation for it." কিন্তু ওইটার জন্য, if Rafayat has to ask for the compensation, there has to be a procedure. যে procedure মাধ্যমে, through that procedure, I'm actually compelled to pay Rafayat. So আমাদের ক্ষেত্রে, what is happening in case of Bangladesh? We are least responsible, but we are extremely vulnerable. We are suffering the consequence, which is not of our doing. we are not the beneficiary of fossil fuel consumption. We are not the beneficiary of carbon emission, but we are paying for it. So somebody has come to my house, somebody has broken my flower vase, but I don't have the procedure to ask him, because the international justice system, the international institution that actually looks into the justice issues, they're not ruled by Bangladesh. What say do we have there, right? So we are the victims of procedural injustice. We are the victims of distributive injustice. We are the victims of we don't even get any reparation. If you tell somebody, well, you have, I think it's Professor Atik who has mentioned very rightfully so that, okay, when these countries are emitting all this carbon emission, the greenhouse gas, and we are going under the water, then we should be allowed to go to countries like America. We should be allowed to emigrate to that country, because that is our compensation. But what happens at the border? I mean, let's talk about Felony in 2013, I believe, when she was shot at the border. So when the water is rising and you're trying to cross the border just to save your life, they don't even ask you anything. First, they shoot at you, right? And if you have noticed that increasingly the climate security issues, climate justice issues are coming under the public discourse of militarization. Like, I'm sure that you remember recently, 60 Bangladeshi migrants have died drowning in Mediterranean when they're trying to cross, from Libya to, Italy, right? So the thing is, why am I fleeing? I'm fleeing, like, every 1 minute a person is losing house. So that's where I think people like all three of us, we have a great responsibility to raise our voice unapologetically to the global audience, saying like, well, you are damaging us, therefore you you have to compensate us. Now, the question to both of you is that, starting with Rafael, you studied environmental economics. You are running an institution that is doing a lot of climate justice work, water security issues in 15th district, as you have mentioned. You have been exposed to a lot of literature about climate justice.
Mm-hmm.
Are you satisfied? Do you think that climate literacy in our school system, in our colleges and universities are sufficient?
Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, I'd like to get off the point that you mentioned about Shakespeare. Even if you're proficient in English, it's still very hard to understand. So you can just imagine how hard it is for somebody who doesn't even know English. I faced that problem in grade 8. It was horrible. Second of all, what you mentioned was this thing has been bothering me for a while as well. See, I've studied climate change. I've studied about climate change, environmental economics, but there's a very wide gap between how it is approached in the West and over here as well, and in the context of the globe too. It's like when we come to like talking about climate change and its solution, we always tend to use big words: adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage. What does it actually mean to the public eye, right? And what is the actual solution? So when it comes to the problems, we talk about sea level rise, global warming, etc., right? But the thing is, these are symptoms of the real problems that are happening on the community level. So we're not actually addressing the problems, we're addressing the symptoms themselves. So in that case, we have to start working on different case studies, specific based case studies from schools themselves. And remember, climate change itself is a very, very vast topic that can be very vague to a lot of people. And we have to address that. We have to make it as distinctive as possible to the mass community. The reason why a lot of people do not become that interested towards studying climate change is because of how overwhelming the entire two words is, because what is climate change? How do we actually solve it? Imagine you're sitting in a room, you're watching the news that, climate change is gonna impact us in this way. And you want to do something, but what is your action plan gonna be? Because the words and all the actions that are being mentioned, they're all on governmental level. So where is your own action plan in that sense? So what I want schools to do, schools, high schools, primary level schools, or even universities as well, take a case study based approach, solve one small solution after the other, and teach the students on like how to become more environmentally friendly as well in this sense. How does this one small solution lead to different steps towards the bigger sentence of sea level rise in that way? And I would also like to mention, like, I was lucky enough in Scholastica to have this teacher called Sharifa Sultana. She used to teach us all. So I took environmental management. I was one of her first students. And all she taught us was basically case studies for our O-levels. And because of those case studies, I garnered the interest even more to study like environmental economics in university. And over there, I studied even more case studies. And that's why I have certain knowledge of like climate change and climate justice issues and even water security. It's because I focus on the small things which lead to the bigger impact, the bigger symptoms over there. And it needs to be the same for the mass community. And in that way, you can garner the interest from the communities as well. At least that's what I believe in.
Sylvie.
Yeah, I mean, most of the things I wanted to cover has already been covered, Verified. Thank you so much. Especially, definitely agree with the Shakespeare point. But yeah, I mean, totally. I'm very happy to hear that your time in Scholastica, the environmental management has already been internalized as a subject, and I think in O levels, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so. So this is actually very important that these like I said, the general education courses I started, I was a potential engineer, but then we came across one sudden general education course that completely changed my entire life, and that's where it needs to start. And I definitely agree with the fact that we need to come out of the world of jargons. It's time.
Exactly.
Because it's just big words, buzzwords, that's probably sounding, if you might not mind me saying, fancy, but when you really come to doing the grassroots problems and deal with the grassroots people and deal with the real life problems, it's a different story. What's written in pen and paper, when it translates into real life, it's a completely different story altogether. So definitely, and of course, understanding this comes from the why we are held accountable to certain doing something. It should come from a point of accountability. It should come from a point of compassion, and the merging of these two will lead us to do what we do. So just if we talk about the developed nations, why they are not paying up for the reparation, or why because they're simply not held accountable to. And whether law or litigation or that sort of instruments can sensitize them, I'm not quite sure, but we really need to explore the ways we can negotiate and talk out and talk to them and build that kind of understanding that this is the problem and this is what's needed to be done. Otherwise, it's just going to we're going to move on revolving around the same circle.
So I'd just like to add one point to that, like to all the points that have been mentioned. One example of like holding accountability would be, I think this is a good example of, like how the EU invests a lot in African nations right now. It's because the African nations have united together to hold the EU accountable for the Scramble of Africa, the meeting that happened in Munich like several hundred years ago, that resulted in the Scramble of Africa. And that is the reason why African nations receive so much funding from the EU, because EU has been held accountable for the mistakes that they've made in the past in African countries. In similar fashion, we have to do this with climate change as well. Climate justice has to come because we have to speak unapologetically and hold these people accountable. Individually, that might not have any impact, but if we do it together, as like we have to unite all the LDCs, we have to unite together, band together, and then hold these countries that are accountable for like their actions right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It reminds me of some of the ongoing master scholarships that are going on, especially from the UK government, like the Chevening or the Commonwealth Scholarship, which can be probably put into those kind of context. And well, yeah, but definitely, I mean, very important issues to address.
Speaking of jargon, I have a very, very good friend, like very good, dear friend of mine, from Canada, Ted Meridian. So once, me being an educator for a long time, he and I were having a conversation once, and instead of using the word school or teaching, I used the word pedagogy. So after using the word pedagogy, and he's a wonderful man, extremely good and efficient teacher. And he often makes fun of me, and I love for that. He makes fun of me, on that issue. So I think in Canada there is a project. It's called knowledge translation. A lot of the universities, in Canada, universities, are run by government money. So because the universities are run by government money, and all the research is funded by government, therefore universities have a responsibility to give back to the community. So therefore, they have this initiative is called Community Engaged Scholarship. So what you are doing, Rafael, would be equal to Community Engaged Scholarship in Canada. And what, Sylvie, what you just have mentioned, that we have to come out of the jargon. I think it's Michel de Montaigne, one French philosopher. He said something that actually resonates very well with me, and in many cases, that people who call themselves intelligent or academic, they have a way with their words. And when general people don't understand our vague and complicated, difficult words, we often get some kind of veneration, respect from them. Oh, I have said something that is so profound that they didn't even understand, right? So speaking of, giving case example, Rabindranath Tagore said long time ago that if you want to understand the distance, if you have to start from near. So I won't understand what is the global climate change if I don't begin to notice, oh, well, my harvest is changing, the crop that I'm growing, the crop cycle that I have, my father said, or, in my lifetime I've seen is changing. So it's something that I can see, from immediate proximity. Now, in terms of holding people who are responsible for it and asking for reparation. Now, let's talk about reparation. We have about 10 years, just 10 years. Within 10 years, and I think Dr. Mohammed, I know it for sure, Dr. Mohammed Yunus has said that this is the decade of last chance. If we don't take it seriously, if we don't stop the carbon emission, that is it. There is no coming back. Now, I'm extremely, hopeful, and I feel very motivated when I see young people like Greta Thunberg. She goes to United Nations and she holds the whole world leaders responsible. When she says unapologetically that you talk about fairy tales of economic growth, endless economic growth, where there is no planet B. With that, I also want to add is that people in Bangladesh, girls like Greta in Bangladesh, who are direct victims of climate injustice. The report that was published in 2019 that shows 22 million children in Bangladesh are directly under threat because of climate change. The report published by United UN, it also showed that girls are, getting, they're wed off, and they're even sold to prostitution because of climate change. Now, you see, we don't connect this dot very easily. Now, what do you think we can start doing to raise our voice, educating our, immediate surrounding, and collectively raise it to the international platform? What do you each think? Starting with Sylvie.
Rafat, you can. Oh. All right. So I think it's a very important point that you mentioned, because these are some very dirty truths that we don't want to face. Mm-hmm. And to begin with, we just have to, we have to draw it, outline it within ourselves that this is what's happening, and who to go in order to really blame. And when it comes to the blame game, it can go on and on, but you can't really, focus on one issue, and because these issues are so intricately intertwined. So I think first of all, what's important is to really take, in Bangladesh, this is a thing I observe with, especially in the women, that they have this very accepting tendency. They accept it as the normal. They don't understand the difference between right and wrong, because that as it's, as you understand that they're functioned or, hardwired to think like that. So first of all, it's important to tell them that no, this is wrong, or this is right, and this is what your right is, and then slowly taking them through through the whole process. And about taking this grassroots level, for example, I mentioned that why not a young girl from probably Delutu Union, why can't she go and represent her case at the global platform? So where is that capacity building going to come from? It's us, it's on us. And every initiative that is there, or probably, and youth is deep, this era youth is the most entrepreneurial than ever, and they have so much capacity. They don't want to work under any certain company. They want to do something on their own. So we have to build the confidence. And going back to the grassroots levels, and it's important that we take, we just don't stay in the city centric capacity, but we go down there, build their confidence, build their capacity, how to talk. And sometimes these jargons are important as well, because they need to relate what it is. If this is happening, if the time of the season, if the rainfall is not happening at a certain time, they need to understand this is because of a phenomena called climate change. And then they will be able to say in the global platform, or even at a national level, that this is the problem. So we need to build their capacities as well at every single level.
So I'd like to share an experience based on this question. This was a couple of years ago. I was selected as one of the global young leaders by the European Commission to speak at the EDD 18, where my topics was basically girls and the environment. So in that platform, there were like around 500 world leaders, UN officials, etc. So in that platform, the host asked me this question: if you had one person or a couple of people that you could bring over here, who would it be? And to that, I directly answered, if I wanted to bring somebody, it would be the girls who are actually facing this problem, because to be honest, they'd be able to better explain this problem than me over here. I am basically acting as their voice right now, but it would be much better if the next time you bring them instead, because they will be able to share the experience much better, and that you'll be able to understand the problem even better as well. And to another context, how do we get the first world to act on taking responsibility? Going back into history, 1971, Bangabandhu, during his 7th March speech, he said, "You fight with whatever you have," right? Whatever you have, fight with it. I think what we need to do right now is utilize whatever resources we have and try to be the initiator towards finding a solution, so that we can show them as an example that, look, we are doing this and you can just come and join in. We cannot always wait for them to come in at this point. If we wait, then it's the end game for us. But if we start doing something, that will actually catalyze them to, okay, I want to join this party as well. Let's go in, And I think that should be the approach. We cannot keep waiting. We have to start our own solutions with whatever we have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the evidence that we have in front of us right now, in Black Lives Matter March, a lot of white people have joined in, and they're fighting beside them. So if we don't...
It's the domino effect, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are two things here. Obviously, this conversation that we're having, this conversation deliberately in English for a very obvious reason, is that most of the conversations that we have is in Bangla for a lot of reasons. But right now, this conversation that we are recording right here, I have plans to actually post it towards the Western audience, so that they can understand the conversation. Right now, we are talking. It's like 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning in Canada or in America, in New York. So this conversation can be pushed there. The other set of conversation that we do is that when we speak in Bangla, when we give in a lot of references and examples, now this is unfortunate reality, very unfortunate reality. This conversation can be pushed towards the Western platform. That can be a drop in the force towards accountability, where we start saying it unapologetically, like we understand what is the cause behind it. Like I often give this example that when a child drowns and dies in Bangladesh, that child's mother, and it's very common phenomena, it finds solace that, okay, this was will of God, and that's why my child has died. Okay. And I'm not hurting anyone's religious feeling. But if you want to look at it from a sociological standpoint, if you want to look at it as a sociologist with using sociological imagination, you can start thinking, okay, so this place did not used to get flooded, 50 years ago. The water is coming here. There's once a time where children could play there. Like climate change is an existential issue for entire Bangladesh. And it is an unfortunate truth that when you talk about climate change, it is not very popular. It is not a fad. It is not, again, I'm not blaming the mass for, why it is not a fad, why it is not in everyday consciousness. Like you see, both of you have been exposed to tremendous amount of literature about, climate justice. But if you weren't, like, Rafayat, I know Sharifah Pai, and I have worked with her, she, a very, a wonderful colleague of mine. She's passionate about these subjects. And that's why, she could light that spark in you, which eventually, paid off. Now you're working for the water security in Bangladesh. It's, I mean, hats off to you. You have come from America. You didn't live there. You have come here to work on this project, right? So it is very meaningful. Towards that, I mean, this is the last question that I have, to both of you, is that what are the initiatives we can take to actually start building literacy? I mean, what kind of, like, be it a 5 minutes video, I mean, be it in a Facebook conversation, be it live, what is it, what Rafayat said, let's fight with whatever we have. What can we do to actually promote that, to create that literacy? And two, what can we do as this, social justice action research, alliance, that, to actually help that, conversation?
Mm-hmm. So I can start off if that's okay. One thing would be to make climate change or environmental justice or any environmental movement subjects relatable in every subject field, be it economics, be it finance, be it physics, whatever it is. There needs to be an environmental aspect to each subject over there, so that what happens is, even though you're not studying environment in specification, you're actually being exposed to environmentalism through physics or economics or finance, wherever you are. That will create more environmental awareness among people as well. And fact is fact, if you want to start off somewhere, it has to be on a mass level education scale, which has to be on like high schools, universities, primary level schools, small activities, big activities, and engage them in volunteerism as well. One thing is very important: you have to build empathy among people regarding these problems. You can talk as much as you want about climate change, but unless they see it in front of their own eyes, they won't be able to feel for the problem itself. They need to see it with their own eyes so that they can feel the problem by themselves. And that is important. And in order to do that, we have to create more volunteerism opportunities, or like more extracurricular activities in schools and educational facilities, which exposes the mass community towards climate change and environmental movements. And in that way, when more people are aware about it, then they can come up with more initiatives on their own. For example, myself, I was inspired by Sharifah Miss, my father, and I actually got into the environmental movement after reading Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. And I think it was like 7 years later, he became my own mentor in this way. Like he flew me to Chicago to give me training on climate leadership. And this is the thing: you need to be inspired from somebody or something. And in order to increase that scale, you have to like introduce environmentalism within all subjects that you teach or you learn in college or high schools right now.
Sylvie.
Sure, definitely. I think focusing on the youth is a very important component of building this literacy, and I think you need to start early, because as I said, it took me to go to a university to know that I could actually pursue a career in environmental science or climate change, where I could not only teach environmental studies, but also actively engage and contribute into the field. So why would it, of course it's a very multidisciplinary subject, because after having the foundation on environmental science, I've had to learn disciplines from say economics, social sciences, and lots of different things. So relating it is extremely important. And not just that, I think small entrepreneurship level exercises and participating in these kind of camps can also help build the confidence among the youth that they can. And for example, some green business plan or something like that, which should be fostered along with these kind of competitions, really help, especially if they're introduced at the school level. And as far as the local level and grassroots levels are concerned, of course, where education, access to education is itself is a challenge, but how to also pave out any kind of mechanism so that these other issues which they're experiencing in everyday life can also be internalized into their academic curriculum is something that's very important to incorporate.
Absolutely. I want to add a comment to our conversation. My good friend from Canada, Ted Meridian, he mentioned this, that North American natives had a policy that they had to look 7 generations ahead as how a decision affected the tribe and Mother Earth. Now, this is the indigenous, attitude towards nature. Now, if we compare that to the so, I mean, did you folks had the chance to read the question? The comment? Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we think about Ted mentioning this, that this was the indigenous people's attitude. This is the indigenous people's attitude towards nature. But as opposed to this, one of the fundamental difference of looking at the nature from the Eurocentric perspective is that when they look at the nature, they consider it as a source of profit extraction. So they think they are apart from nature, and this is based on study of Western philosophy, Western knowledge, that capitalism in summary, that basically how do you actually extract profit surplus from that nature. As a matter of fact, today the whole world has been brought to its knee because of the same mentality. COVID-19, we have created that. So I was wondering, what is your opinion? I'm sorry, apologize for my dog. So what is your opinion, your comment on Ted's observation?
Mm-hmm. So Apu, you go ahead this time.
Just go ahead, yes.
All right. So in terms of the comment, I think what he meant was like, Native Americans or indigenous people, they actually care about consequences to another level in this sense. So this is basically a discussion between short-term goals and long-term goals. How much drive do we have towards each goals? Because right now we're in a time where we think life is short, and what are we going to survive the next day or not? And that has kind of played into our psychological emotion as well on how we perceive a problem or address a problem right now. Do we think about our future? Do we think about our children or our children's children? There are some people, and like the world also acts on self-interest in that way. Some people might care about themselves more than what will happen to the future generations. So this is the mentality that needs to be changed in that way. The natives, why it was possible for them to think of a policy in this way is because they are united. They are a group that is united by each soul in that sense. But us as a world, as a nation, as a community right now, we are not. So that needs to change. There's a saying. I think this goes with the comment as well. It's an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I think it applies very specifically to this comment right here.
Sylvie, can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm just having some technical issues, but I can hear now.
If you wanted to add something about the comment.
My apologies for that. Yeah, totally. I think I could, sorry, but I could barely hear what Rafat mentioned. But my take on this would be to, as I said, going back to the fact what I mentioned about the accountability and combined force. Definitely echo with that. And one thing is important I want to mention, and I know it's different because as I was talking about, bringing the experiences from the north to the south, or taking south to north, I think these are some things that needs probing exploration, because what in such situations are done as best practices, what has been the success cases. These are something that we can explore and build up on them, making sure that every nation's context is particularly internalized. So yeah.
Sylvie, thank you very much for joining us today, and Rafaya, thank you very much for joining. This is the first conversation we have had regarding climate justice. We will have many more conversation on the climate justice issues in future, and we will obviously stay in touch with you folks and try to find out ways to collaborate and actually promote climate justice in Bangladesh for the betterment of Bangladesh and for the betterment of the whole world. Once again, I hope to work with you folks in the future, and thank you once again.
Thank you, Baya, for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. Lovely to be here. Thank you.